From the heartland of America, it's the Bail in the Midwest podcast, hosted by Shane Rolf. Executive producer, David Stuckman.
In this episode, we talk a lot about a criminal case, United States versus Wayne Lozier, a bounty hunter who was convicted of federal kidnapping charges for apprehending a fugitive. Mr. Lozier failed to follow certain local state laws relating to bounty hunting, and the federal government then used that failure as justification to charge and convict him of kidnapping and sentence him to a 10-year prison term. Since we recorded this episode, Mr. Lozier's conviction was overturned due to technical issues with the jury instructions. While this is good news for Mr. Lozier, the United States Department of Justice has recently announced that they are planning on retrying him. So while we don't know what will happen with the case going forward, the issues we discuss in this episode continue to be of great concern to those of us working in bail bonds. With that in mind, we hope you enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to the Bail in the Midwest podcast, where we explore a variety of topics related to bail, pretrial release, and the criminal justice system in the Midwest. My name is Shane Rolf. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Kansas Bail Agents Association, and I've worked in this field for the past 38 years. Now, a lot of time on this podcast, we talk about kind of, esoteric issues surrounding bail, things like crime rates and failure to appear rates, drug addiction, case law, and especially legislation. To be sure, all these things are important, but those things are not what people think of when you mention bail bonds. They think of bounty hunters, fugitive apprehension, Dog the Bounty Hunter, wanted posters and westerns, Midnight Run, and maybe even Stephanie Plum. You know, the sexy part of bail bonds. But one of the things that makes it sexy is that it's risky and it's different. And increasingly, some of that risk is coming from the authorities rather than the fugitives. My guest today, Jeff Barton, is a longtime bail bondsman and bail enforcement agent and trainer in Missouri, where one of the biggest recent bounty hunter cases has been brought in federal court. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Shane, thank you very much. Pleasure.
Well, it looks like you're someplace sunny and happy, so thank you for taking the time out to talk to us today.
Yep. Cancun, Mexico, very nice.
Oh, awesome. We should all of us here shivering should want to be in Mexico. Now, personally, I'm a bit of an anomaly in what I call bail world. I started doing this when I was 20, and I haven't really done anything else. But a lot of people have a variety of experiences before they fell into this line of work, and I think you're in kind of that latter category. Can you tell us a little bit about your path of how you got into all this?
Yeah, so back in the 80s, I was a local police officer, early 20s, and my first contact with bail bondsmen is when we arrest somebody, and then a bail bondsman would come and get them out. Didn't really know, law enforcement in Missouri typically doesn't know what bondsmen and still don't know what we can do. They don't know the statutes. Now, Kansas City, Missouri actually has one of the best internal police policies I've ever seen in dealing with bail bondsmen as far as the statutes, but most don't have a clue.
Well, Kansas City, Missouri has that check-in policy, where you go check in and show your paperwork. It's okay, but they can also be kind of difficult about it. We've gone in to look for people that have missed court, and we've already had to pay off the bond, but there's an opportunity to get something back on that, so we're still trying to locate them. And you go check in with that, and we've had officers go, "Oh no, this is out of date. I'm not gonna check you in." It's like, well, I've done what I'm supposed to do. This is what I'm going to, I'm not going to fill this out. So, I mean, you have your ups and downs, any law enforcement. But yeah, if you get into more rural areas and stuff like that, they're like, okay, well, thanks for letting us know. And that's the extent of it.
Yeah, I carry a binder with the statutes. I show them. I'm like, hey, Google it. You can see that these are still current. I'm not trying to BS you, we're just here to get our person. So.
Well, so you're about the same age as I am. It looks like you graduated, 83-ish?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then you went in the military after that?
Yep, military police. And then I always wanted to be a cop, so I worked some factory jobs, and then got the opportunity to get into law enforcement. And I truly did love it. It's just one of those things, in 1987, I think they were paying me $13,900 a year. Poor kid, I couldn't afford a Egg McMuffin at McDonald's. So I got the opportunity to leave there, go to a utility company for the city. and a guy called George Dodge out of Columbia had come over to Hannibal area to write a bond, and told one of the deputies, hey, you know anybody that might want to get into bail bonds over here? So I was in my 20s. I called George and met with Monty, and they hired me. And so since 1992, I've been licensed as a bail bond agent.
Well, and so I noticed that you'd been like a managing director for over 50 plus agents at one point in time. Is that what I was seeing that?
Yeah.
So,
when first they gave me a regional area with the Dodges, and I had a lot of agents under me, you know, but back then in the 90s, bail was it was booming. So there was a lot of internal theft, and, you know, it opened my eyes a lot, you know, that, you know, people actually steal money, and, you know, they got to be accountable. And I think most times people that did it, I think they had the thought that, hey, I'm going to pay that back. And then, you know, they get over their head, and, you know, so I had to constantly keep an eye on them and train. And so.
Well, I mean, in late 80s, early 90s, you know, was big crack cocaine epidemic. I know that locally here, you know, we just finished building a new jail a couple years after I started doing this in the late 80s. And their plan was that jail was supposed to take us, it had 267 beds, and it had taken them from 104 beds to 267 beds. And the crack cocaine just blew right through that. That was supposed to be enough housing space for them until the year 2000. And they were over that before the jail ever opened because of all that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a lot of that. I mean, it really shot up in there. I mean, and then like most drug things, it kind of, you know, did the curve back down, you know, as you filtered through your people and stuff along those lines. And then until the next drug comes along, which later on was methamphetamine.
Yeah.
So tell us more about military police. I mean, I assume you went in there, did some training there. It looks like, were you out of the military for a while and then re-enlisted, or?
Yeah. So, you know, I joined the National Guard. Actually, a couple buddies of mine. One of them ended up being like a colonel of the Illinois State Police, a 2-star general in the Illinois National Guard. But I did that until 91. I did 8 years. I got out. My kids were young. Well, then 2005, one of my boys joined the National Guard, and with 2 wars going on, I figured, well, he's probably going to deploy. So I re-enlisted with him, and we deployed together. So it was pretty cool. I mean, I thought when you get old, you know, time flies. And I was like, oh, this year will go quick. That was the longest year of my life.
Well, one of the guests we had on really early was what's his name? Jared Fishman, and he wrote a book called Fire on the Levee, and he was, you know, back in the day, he was assigned to Kosovo for the State Department when he first got out of law school, and it's about the same time that you were probably deployed in there within a couple of years, and he was talking about in kind of high-minded terms about trying to rebuild the rule of law in Kosovo. But for the time that you were deployed there, what was your experience in Kosovo?
You know, you could definitely tell, you know, the Serbian villages versus the Albanian, you know, because the Albanians, they really loved us because Clinton, you know, during the air campaign with Milosevic there. So they really loved us. But you could tell if you were in a Serbian village, like if the little kid waved at us, you know, the parents would slap them. They didn't want them, you know, being friendly to us. But, you know, I was very lucky and fortunate, you know, that was our deployment. You know, people go to some brutal places, but Kosovo, there was a lot of corruption and stuff, but, you know, we didn't have any problems. The Americans in our bases didn't. So,
well, and that's, you know, there's a reason they use the term balkanization when they talk about, you know, breaking people down in multicultural groups. I know that stepmother of mine was originally from Hungary, and she would, you know, point at some picture and go, well, no Hungarian would ever live in that house, would ever paint their house that color. And it's like, that's really kind of weird. You don't really think about that from an American perspective of just how broken up those different areas are. I mean, she's like, those Serbs, they're really mean people. And it's like, well, okay.
And it's like our interpreters would be, I would say, let's talk in this village. They're like, oh, no, I can't speak to them. I was like, do you know Serbian? They're like, yeah. I was like, then let's do it. And they're like, oh, no, they'll know. They act like each other. They're like monsters or something, you know. It was unique because I was like, I can't even tell what you are, you know. They're not going to, except by your dialect. And they were good enough that they were pretty happy when they pulled it off. So
Well, it's amazing how far back some of those entrenched animosities go. I mean, you talk about, that whole region of Europe there is, where you had the back and forth of empires, the Roman Empire, the Ottoman. And so then they look at the Albanians and they go, well, those are just the remnants of the Ottoman Turks, that were here before. And then the Serbs and stuff, well, they were the Slavs that came on along this way. And they remember that from, 600 years ago or whatever was going on there, like it has any real bearing on their life now. But I mean, obviously it does.
Right.
So, I mean, do you see, I mean, and this is getting off of my political bent a little bit, there's an argument that we're becoming further apart than we've ever been, divided up into different, racial, ethnic, class groups, everything. Do you see some of the same things that you saw in Kosovo occurring in the United States with that breakup? Or are we, even though we're a homogenous society, are we sticking together better? Or are we coming apart?
Hey, it kind of, there's certain people that, and there's smart people on both sides, whether you're left or right. But man, the divide, like you said, is intense, and it's kind of hateful. People will say, for example, if you voted for Trump, you're either rich or you're an idiot and you don't know which one, open your wallet, and I'm like, you can vote for whoever you want. There's no sense, running each other down like that. But it has been divisive and unbelievable. Families, I mean, even the family units, there's a lot of animosity there and hatred. That it is kind of like that, but different reasons, the ethnic cleansing that went on in the Balkans. And,
right.
When I was there, it was too short removed. If my wives and mothers and daughters would have been raped and killed, I'm sure I would still have a lot of hate for the other side. But
well, yeah, I remember the pictures of basically concentration camps during some of that time. I mean, not death camps in that sense, but people locked up and herded into. I mean, we hear about refugee camps and stuff along those lines in the Midwest or the Mideast, but those are just basically areas where you've developed things. I mean, this was true, and internment camps, where people dress, and it's like, eh. Now, of course, now I'm remembering back from 20 plus years ago, but. So I mean, you continued on in the bail bonds all this time, but then you sort of got into casino work as well. So how did that sound? That's everybody's interested in casinos. Tell us about that.
At the end of the 90s, about 2000, the bail bond business kind of went to shit, basically. In our area, instead of, you used to have to bond for everything, no valid operators, but I was writing about 40 some bonds a week in our little area. Now I probably don't write 40 bonds in 10 months, but the volume, when it cut down, I did bail bonds full time at that time. I was like, man, I'm gonna have to go get another job. I only know how to do a couple of things, and so I went back into law enforcement. Back then, I always tell people in my classes, I think a lot of the new statutes are because of the things we did back in the old days, so I still had my bail bond license. I didn't talk about bail. When we did a case, I was with the narcotics multi-jurisdictional task force, and I would never date. The clientele knew me as a bondsman. They would ask me bond questions, and I was like, look, I can't talk to you about bond. I did my job. So I did that for a while. My wife at the time hated it. Of course, I loved it. Long hair, dry fat, it was a good time. So they built a casino about 30 miles north of Hannibal, and a buddy of mine was there, and they hadn't opened yet. And he said, hey, you should come up and put in for security up here. So long story short, I did. The funny thing is we had a federal investigation going on with these marijuana grows, and the DEA had brought me a tracker that we were going to put on this guy's vehicle. Well, he hadn't done it yet, and I had it in my glove box. I didn't know it was on, so I went 30 miles north in my undercover type truck. I applied for a job, so when the feds come in and they're looking at this map, first trip, goes up there, and I'm like, oh, what date was that? And I was like, that was me. They were like, what are you doing up here? We worked this area these times. I was like, I was putting in an application. So I ended up getting on there, hired in surveillance. I did it for a little bit before they opened. Then Missouri wouldn't give me a gaming license because they said I had been a law enforcement officer. So Missouri's got a thing, if you've been in law enforcement, you can't hold a casino license for 2 years if it's in the host city or county. So, of course, the casino couldn't keep me on because I couldn't get a license. So I talked to a lawyer, and it ended up, since I was multi-jurisdictional, I didn't raise my right hand in that jurisdiction. I did it in another one. So they were able to get me around that. So the casino had filled my job, but they let me back on. I worked in surveillance for a couple months, and they couldn't get anybody to pass a background check for a level 1. So the state police said, hey, you should put in for that. So I did. Then I ended up running security for 3 years, and then a surveillance guy walked out. So they were like, hey, will you run surveillance until we can hire somebody? So I was like, yeah. Well, I love it in surveillance because in the casinos, it's very separated. It's not like out west where the director runs security and surveillance, and nobody can come in our room except law enforcement. There's a lot more regulation, and I'm not getting beat up every month about why do you got 5 security officers here at 8 o'clock in the morning, things like that. We have our staffing, and they don't mess with us typically.
So, I mean, surveillance, are we just basically watching everything, like watching the table, people, or watching the guest, or a combination of all that?
We watch the guests, we watch the employees. We basically, our job is to protect the company and corporate assets. So we're watching for collusion with the players and the employees. We're looking for employee theft. Grandma burns her arm on the hot chocolate in the buffet. We're getting the video evidence for that. So it's very busy. It can go from 0 to 100, and every day is unique. I've been in the casinos now for 23 years, and it going from law enforcement to this, I tell people all the time, we're not digging ditches in the hot. It's air conditioned in the summer, and it's heated in the winter. It's nice. Just come in there, and I like people that are inquisitive. Why did Shane do this? Is there something more to what Shane's doing, or is Shane really smart, or is Shane really not so smart? And it's our job to figure out what people are doing and making sure they're not taking our money unfairly.
Well, and I think that, the other players, but I mean, one of the things I noticed, I don't gamble a lot, so I'm not in a casinos on a regular basis, but, like at the blackjack table, you'll have, somebody will put some money down and get chips, and they'll lay it all out there. And presumably that's for the camera right above to acknowledge what just occurred. And then they'll drop it in place and give them the chips where there's a record. But there's hand signals and other stuff going on there that you assume that's to acknowledge to the people watching the cameras what's really going on.
That's exactly right. So you'll hear the dealer might say check change or something. Well, then floor will call out, go ahead, that they're watching, and then the stuff they do, their motions, they're putting on a display for the camera. So I always tell people, we're not out to get anybody fired. We want to protect you. When that accusation is made, I tell my people, try to prove them innocent. Don't just assume that, they screwed up. Let's see what's going on here. So we teach our people how to cheat. That's the other unique thing about surveillance is you don't leave a surveillance job typically. Now, I was an anomaly running security and then coming back into surveillance. Usually you can't bounce out of surveillance and run security like I did, but they pitched a thing that it was for the company's benefit, so the state let them do it. But most times you can't come out of surveillance and work another place because if there was a blind spot, you would know, and you would know what surveillance doesn't know. And that's what I tell other properties, don't let your surveillance people come out and be a table games dealer because they know if there's a weak spot in that surveillance room, so. And most people typically don't want to steal, but I think, dealer, for example, I don't mean to pick on them, but if they make a mistake and they mentally know, oh shit, I just made a mistake, but they don't ever hear anything, then they're probably like, oh, is anybody even really watching us, Right. So that's what I tell my people. Every little thing that's a violation, write it, call the pit so they know, okay, these guys are watching. It's not really, they're not watching. Nobody trickled it down to retrain them.
Well, and that comes back into a topic we've discussed here before is just, enforcement and having accountability. And so one of the issues with bail reform where they let everybody go is like, well, hey, I just got away with this, so what happens next time? I'm going to be able to get away with this again. I'm not advocating we should be, a surveillance state to the degree that casino is, but, having that, I guess what we always called in Boy Scouts was too deep leadership. where you had, you weren't ever alone with the kids, so there could never be any allegations of anything wrong. But it's the sort of thing, you've got somebody looking over your shoulder. A lot of your corruption, a lot of your embezzlement comes when somebody consolidates a lot of different roles in themselves to where what might be checking them, well, no, then they're checking themselves and like, well, I checked everything and I've just changed all this. And until somebody actually comes and looks at it, it's a problem.
Exactly. It's a huge deterrent. Just those cameras. It's like I tell general managers over the past, it's like, Jeff, you guys didn't catch that? And I was like, well, picture 1,000 cameras on the system. If I only got 4 people in there, that's 8 eyeballs. We can only look at so much. That's why a lot of the calls that come in, or anytime money's moving and stuff, people are calling surveillance either on the phone or on the radio. And I tell my guys, that's a clue. They're just telling you they're getting ready to move something. So you probably want to pull up the cameras and watch that money move, and then if there's not regulated things going on, my guys can freelance and go in, start looking at the gift shops and run in reports on the point of sale systems and see, make sure everything, people aren't free pouring their alcohol, for example, watching the cost of goods. And
well, I assume that's all recorded where you can go back and review that stuff later. If
Absolutely. Yeah. Most states have, like Missouri, when I was there, I'm actually licensed in Illinois now. I've done Missouri, Kansas, and Illinois, but Missouri was 14 days typically, and then 30 days on other areas. Illinois has got a minimum, but I'm probably 10 times that now on storage, because people always be like, you guys have coverage? I was like, let us look. And we go way back on ours. And, it's changed so much in 2 decades. We used to do the VCR tapes and have 7,000 tapes in rotation. And now, with megapixel cameras and high resolution, my goodness. And, a lot of places don't want to show video. And I'm like, show it. That's because back in the days, our cameras were they were good, but not like they are now. Now, people be amazed. It's almost like CSI you see on TV, but not quite.
Well, I've noticed that just in when the news is released, when the police release pictures, this is a person of interest. Well, it's like the quality of the camera can really vary a whole lot. But I've noticed over the years, they've gotten really, really, nice pictures that you're seeing, multiple megapixels of people in the stores. It's like,
you remember those bank robberies? You'd see that picture and go, really? Is that the camera they got there?
Exactly. And that's a bank with, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So let's talk about the federal case that I'm referencing in the beginning, and that's the Wayne Lozier case. It's crazy that became a federal case. Can you give us a little bit of background? I mean, it's not exactly in your area, but closer to your area here, and we've all kind of been following that.
So I had no idea who Wayne was. A couple of years ago, I had a bond jumper, misdemeanor case, person I thought was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So, of course, I don't want to drive down there for a misdemeanor, so I called a bondsman down there to see if they could throw me some help getting this person picked up. And they were like, wait a minute, where are you from? I was like, Missouri. And they were like, and you guys got our guy in jail up there? I was like, whoa, wait, I don't know what you're talking about. I hadn't even seen it. So she tells me his name. So I do a little research. So I email the Department of Insurance in Missouri, and I'm like, hey, what's going on with this? They got a bondsman arrested 2 years after the fact. The feds came in, and he was emailing me back and telling me, yeah, they weren't licensed in Missouri. Now, I was teaching the classes at this time. Thank goodness Wayne didn't call me, because I'd have been like, hell yeah, go get her, I didn't realize that they took a lot of that stuff out of the statute, and their interpretation of it is, if you're not licensed in Missouri with a Missouri license, you can't hunt here.
Right.
So, and I mean, I can see where they're saying that, but there's still a lot of gray in that statute. It's not locked up. So somebody tells Wayne to call me. So, I mean, I was talking to him about every day when he was in that county jail. It was terrible. I finally saw him. I went to a couple of his hearings, and then I went to the trial, and I couldn't understand why his lawyers weren't talking about bail case law. The feds were trying this case as a federal kidnapping. He was originally facing life in prison.
Right.
And, the federal kidnapping statutes basically came out of Missouri from the Lindbergh baby that was kidnapped. So totally different. But the FBI, when you hear their testimony, they laid it out like a human trafficking case. And I'm sitting there going, this isn't human trafficking. He wasn't hiding the fact that he stayed in a hotel. Well, that led into the premeditation, because they're saying, look, he got a hotel room up here. He knew he was coming up to get her. So the money he made out that skip, I think he made $500 for. Now, he has been in jail for 4 years for $500, bringing a misdemeanor bond jumper back into custody. So
but for people that don't follow this, basically, the girl had been charged with some sort of domestic violence in Louisiana.
Right.
And my understanding is she went into rehab and missed court when she was in rehab. And once she got out of rehab, rather than coming back, she left Louisiana or left Florida, wherever rehab was, and she went to stay with somebody else in Missouri that she'd met in rehab. Right. And the bondsman's like, hey, I'm on the hook for $5,000. I need somebody to go get her because she's not, taking care of this. And so then he hired Wayne. And then, what I thought was masterful on that was, we're reading over this, was he called and somehow he had a number for her, managed to get that from someplace, called and claimed he was from the courts. And, wanted to send her a new court date. And, but he needed to mail it to her. And so he managed to basically, I know that this book behind me, of Ralph Papa Thorson, the hunter, and then Bob Burton was one of his acolytes. They talk about the best weapon you have, the best tool you have is a telephone. You can call and you can talk to people. And so but basically he managed to talk and convince her to give him the address where he's at. And it's like, all right, well, we know where she's at. That's just like ABC. Okay, we've done what we're supposed to do. Let's go get her.
Yep. Now, see, in St. Peter's, Missouri, so 2 years later, so Wayne and his partner Jody come up from the state of Louisiana. They come to St. Peter's. Smartest thing Wayne ever did, and I tell people in all my training, wear that body camera. If you don't have one, get one, because people lie. You look at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, they put out all kinds of stuff. It made Wayne look terrible, but I get all of his body cam video. He knocks on the door. The resident lady who lived there opens the door and he's like, who all's here? She tells him the fugitive, but whatever her name is, I can't remember, that she's in the basement. Wayne goes down there. It's all on camera, hooks her up, takes her. And it was that woman. Apparently her brother is a law enforcement officer in Missouri, and told her they let her use the phone while they were traveling with her. And we've all done that. And apparently they told her to cause a scene the next time they stop. And that's what she did at the Sullivan truck stop. Some of that video I posted. And, when I first hear about this, I'm thinking, this is crazy. Wayne had a paid lawyer out of New Orleans, I believe. And that lawyer told him, if this goes to trial, I'm not driving up to the 8th Circuit to try this thing. You're going to have to get another lawyer. So Obviously the feds are going to try it. He loses that lawyer, so he gets public defender guys. No offense. I think these guys put in a lot of work. I just wish we could have convinced them to use the bail statute during the trial instead of waiting. And, Topo Padilla, Dave Stuckman, they really went to bat and got some attorneys involved, some great attorneys that wrote that amicus brief that I still use now. I give it to lawyers. I'm like, look at this stuff right here. This is what you got to argue.
So there's two statutes in Missouri that they're claiming he violated. The federal statute on kidnapping, let's see, I've actually got that here. So let me see if I can read some of that. Says, whoever unlawfully seizes, confines, inveigles, whatever that means, decoys, kidnaps, abducts, or carries away and holds for ransom or reward or otherwise any person, and then across the state lines, is then in violation of the kidnapping statute. So I think that a lot of this stuff is then, the arguments that they were making at court keyed on whether or not taking her was unlawful and what was the definition of unlawful. What are the statutes in Missouri? They look like I think they were talking about two of them. One that had to be the law enforcement notification statute and the licensing statute.
Yeah. First time violation of not notifying local law enforcement, misdemeanor. So that blew me away. I was like, okay, you committed a misdemeanor. That's a fine. Well, then they went with the licensing one, which is very vague about. So there's two different, it talks about in the statutes licensing a couple different times. One of them says to be a bail bond agent, you have to have a Missouri bail bond license.
Right.
Well, when it's talking about surety recovery, it just says you have to be licensed. It doesn't say a Missouri license, but the state of Missouri's interpretation was it has to be a state of Missouri license. Now, keep in mind, no state or local jurisdictions charged Wayne with any crime. For what he did, they didn't get involved on it. It was the federal government did it 2 years later that they indicted him. Which licensing, was an art. They didn't really argue it that much. The judge's jury instruction, when I left court that day, I was confident he beat this thing. But I didn't listen to the jury instruction the next day when the judge told the jury that if you believe Mr. Lozier did not have a Missouri license, you must find him guilty. And the jury did.
Well, right. I mean, I not to blame the jury on this, because I don't see how given that instruction that was there, because I've read that. How could they have determined either way? I mean, Wayne essentially admitted he hadn't notified law enforcement beforehand. And, and then there was some question as to whether or not he needed to have an in-state license, or was it okay for his out-of-state license? Was there reciprocity? I don't think that's even built in the statute. I think that might be insurance department regulations.
Right.
And then there was a third statute that did some definitional stuff that they're pointing back to. It's like, I just don't understand why the local people, why didn't they charge him for the violation if that could be the issue?
Exactly. Now, I sat in one of the first hearings. The federal judge is literally looking at Wayne's table saying he should have just turned her over to the local police. I wanted to stand up and go, he couldn't. She wasn't in NCIC. The local police were going to run her there.
They weren't going to extradite.
Yeah, he's got to take her back. It was like, but, it was the unfortunate thing between the feds not knowing the Missouri law. And that's kind of how the 3-judge panel at the appeal, it kind of seemed to me like they were going after the government prosecutor about why are you trying this on state statute. And
yeah, I did listen to the oral arguments on that, and it didn't seem all that great for them. Now keep in mind, there were multiple mistakes that were made over the course of this, this deal. One, did not get the defendant to actually sign the contract. So you didn't have that specific contractual consent, even though you have the implied consent. You didn't have the contractual consent. Then you didn't check in. And that's a pretty basic one. A lot of times you can do that with a phone call. Hey, I'm going to be in this area. I'm going this place, whatever, I mean, that came out of that deal in Kansas City years ago. Tamar Young, that bonding company in Kansas City was involved in. They went to pick up a guy, and then the brother decided to fight him, and they ended up hooking up the brother as well. And he basically died of positional asphyxia because they had him, hog-tied laying on his stomach. And the bounty hunter there ended up going to jail for a year over that, but they dismissed. And that might have been one of the reasons why, because I remember that case was they had just passed the law on notification, and they had not notified before they went there. They called the cops after they already had the guy, said, we've got 2 people here for you, because apparently the brother the one who died had warrants as well, even though it wasn't their bond. But that case that non-notification charge was dismissed because it had never been charged before. And the judge is like, you can't just pick and choose when to charge this. Either you're going to charge it or you're not going to charge it. Just because something else happened, we're not going to, and that got dismissed back in that day.
Now, interesting thing about notification. So the state, when I say the state, I mean the Department of Insurance in Missouri, their expectation, they told me, is you have to check in person. Well, after George Dodge died and we started our own company, we're big in Boone County, Missouri, where Columbia is. Well, the first time I go to check in there, of course, my wife has blonde hair, and I walk into Columbia PD and they're like looking at me. They're like, who are you? I was like, I'm Jeff Barton. I'm a bondsman. We're here. And they're like, we've never seen a bondsman before. I was like, what? I said, how do they pick up their skips? He's like, oh, you just call 411. It's 411 or 311. So you check in there. Well, I had another bondsman in Southern Missouri call me and tell me the state arrested him and his agents because they were in a little town, didn't have 24/7 police, had a sign on the door, if you need law enforcement, call 911. He calls 911, tells them what he's doing. They get their guy. Well, they end up getting arrested. The Department of Insurance fines them like $1,000 each for not notifying in person. And I was like, man, you should have fought that. Those 911 calls are recorded. You've got that thing recorded, and somebody's got to fight this stuff to get some precedent laid down there, because there's jurisdictions that. Now, I always try to do it with my local guys because I used to be a cop there. And, law enforcement will typically, hey, last time we dealt with Shane was over here. No, they help you out for the most part.
Yeah, which is it's really always helpful to have somebody, local in the area. I mean, and I know a lot of states have passed laws. I mean, Kansas has one as well, that, you're supposed to be either a licensed Kansas agent, bondsman, or if you're not a bondsman, you're supposed to have a bounty hunter license. And if you come in from out of state, you're supposed to have one of those other two people with you. Either go get your license, and it's not a big deal. It's $200 for every 2 years, and it's a fingerprint card and background. You just make sure you're not a convicted felon. I mean, it's pretty light as far as that goes.
Yeah, and there was a lot of misinformation that was out there about Wayne. East Coast, West Coast people were saying, well, Jeff, if you would have went with him. I said, no, I asked the Department of Insurance, and they told me if I'd have been there and I'd have took her into custody and gave her to Wayne in Missouri, then I just gave an unlicensed person, this person, I could have been indicted for facilitating a kidnapping. So then I said, okay, so if I grab her and I take her out of Missouri, and I give her to him outside the state, and they say, well, we can't give you advice. But so I tell everybody now, if you're doing a pickup for somebody, do the transfer across state lines. So
yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of times and like you said, you can call somebody in Louisiana, hey, I need some help, on this deal. A lot of times you'll do that. Okay, you pick my person, here's all the paperwork, and I'll meet you halfway so you don't have to drive all the way up here. I mean, it's nice in an interconnected world that we're able to do that. I mean, there's, plenty of Facebook groups with bounty hunters. There's, you can get a hold of and talk to people and go, I need some help in this area. Can you drive by and see if maybe this car's there? So it's also helpful if you have a felony warrant, you can just call the cops and go, hey, but oftentimes they'll mess it up.
Yeah.
Oh, let's go bang, 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 and then the person's gone. And
when I was a cop, I tell people all the time, and I hate to bash on cops. I love cops. I was one. But when I was working my shift, I had other things I wanted to do. I knock on the door. Hey, is Jeff Barton here? I'm literally talking to Jeff Barton. I just don't know it. And they're like, no, he's not here right now. Oh, okay. I can call the police department when he gets in. No big deal. Boom. And your guy just goes, Now, back then it was a lot different. We didn't have cell phones and cameras to have pictures on. But, nowadays, especially with the cameras, I mean, I'm telling everybody, get those tattoos. So when you get your person, because, the crazy thing about methamphetamine, these drugs, we went after a girl not too long ago. 3 months after she posted bond, I was talking to her through a window. I didn't even recognize her. Her appearance had changed so much that I'm telling my guys, you got to get pictures of these tattoos, because I was talking to her. So it's crazy.
I've got a funny story on that one. This is years and years ago. It was Felicia, and I've had a bad run of people named Felicia missing court on me, but we had the information, and we had on our little information sheet, and it said tattoos, and it said right forearm, and it said aunt, and they'd spelled it AUNT. Okay, it's like, so they've got a tattoo that says aunt. That's kind of weird. Anyway, the bounty hunters go grab this girl, and KCMO PD is there, and she's claiming she's somebody else. That's not me. It's not me. And he goes, look, got a tattoo. And so he opened the tattoo, and the tattoo was of the insect, an ant, and the insect ant on her arm. And it had been spelled wrong on our paperwork. And Casey Mills says, no, it's not the same person. This says AUNT, and this is the picture of an ant. And you got to let it go. It's like, are you shitting me? But no, I mean, and they made us let her. It's like, whatever. I'm not gonna go to jail over this deal. So we let her go, and never did catch her in time after that. Cost me the full bond because we misspelled the tattoo on her arm.
Yeah.
Before we would have had pictures or anything along those lines of it.
Right. Exactly.
So on Wayne's case, how did this become a federal case? I mean, what interest did the feds even have in this?
Man, I'd love to know that, because when I worked for that multi-jurisdictional task force, we were a state task force, but to get the feds involved, you had to have, like back then there had to be 200 plants or 200 pounds. The feds just didn't get involved in shit. This, I don't know if they're trying to make a point. I can't believe that local St. Peter's officer had the juice to get the feds in. I don't know what prompted the federal government to take on this case, unless they thought it was going to be I don't know if the Department of Insurance in the state pushed for it. I don't know, because no local jurisdictions filed it.
Right. I mean, they've got clear violations that they could have filed. I mean, for at the very least, a notification statute. Even that was probably unquestionable. There was no notification. They could have charged if they chose to.
Yep.
And the local DA there apparently chose not to do so. I mean, and so, I just don't understand how the feds became involved in this. It just seems a little odd that well, we're going to make a federal case out of this. Why this? Because I mean, historically, they've been like, yeah, we don't want to be anything involved with it. I mean, we interviewed Jen Coffendorfer, a few episodes ago, and she's a true crime person now, but she was an FBI agent at the time, and they were sending off 5-kilo cocaine cases to local jurisdictions because they didn't want to deal with them. Yeah. Like, why would you take this technical violation on this and again, I have to think it has to do with that somebody was related to a police officer and they were throwing a fit about it and over beers with somebody else or something, and like, hey, you really need to take a look at this.
Yeah. My local judges always ask me, Jeff, how long are you going to do this bail bonds? And I'm like, well, until I physically or mentally can't do it, and I said, unless you guys get rid of us. And our local judges, they love us. They're like, oh no, you guys aren't going anywhere. But, nationwide, it seems that the push, and nothing against Dog. I love Dog and Leland and them, but nobody knew about us until then. It was like, unless you had a run in with the law and needed a bondsman, or you were a cop that dealt with bondsmen, nobody even knew we still existed 25 years ago, 30 years ago. So, and some people still answer a lot of questions because Hannibal's right on the river with Illinois. So I get a lot of Illinois clientele. So, which, no bounty hunt state there, but they don't know how it works. So you have to explain to them and, lay it out there for them.
So let's kind of close out Wayne's deal here, because what it looks like they're trying to do is say that because you had this technical violation of Missouri's statutes, that then becomes unlawful, and because it's unlawful because of the technical violation, that then becomes can be a federal kidnapping charge because of crossing state lines.
Right, using a cell phone, and yeah.
Well, that seems awfully broad. I mean,
I know it was a hell of a stretch. That's what I get. You listen to the arguments in the trial, and I mean, the feds were laying out. I'm sitting there going, "Hell, they're talking about human trafficking. This isn't human trafficking." Right. This is, he's doing this job. And, I wish that the jury, just like that case in Missouri that I just testified in June, the judge would not let the defense talk about bail statute, case law. It was just crazy.
Well, we definitely want to talk about it. Well, I was just, the analogy I was thinking about though. So you go do everything right and you pick up your person and you're driving them back across state lines, but you're stopped for speeding. Well, technically, speeding's a violation of the law. Are they then able to sit there and go, look, in the process of taking this person across state lines, you've violated the law. So now that becomes kidnapping.
Yeah.
I mean, and how far down that rabbit hole do we go?
Yeah. And that local St. Peter's officer called Wayne. Wayne talked to him on the phone during the transport. This guy is telling Wayne apparently to bring her back. Well, he don't know who that is on the phone, I mean, it's not like he had Pablo Escobar or something, but right. You don't know who's telling you to bring that person back, and you're under the impression you're following the law, you're doing what you do. So getting back to Wayne, when I started reaching out for him, so there's a lot of people in the industry that know him from Louisiana. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't like it. I don't know why. I don't know him personally other than talking to him so much on the phone, but other people would tell me, if you're within a couple of days of having to pay a bond, Wayne's your guy. He's going to find him for it. So, as far as his personality, people were talking about, oh, let's listen to the way he talked. Holy smokes. If you listen to my body cam, I'm like a 1980s cop. I tell people in my training, all right, listen to this guy. Try not to be this guy. Be this guy over here, but it's nothing illegal, but it sounds terrible. And it sounded terrible in court when they were playing some of Wayne's. But Wayne's attorney did say, we're not trying him, being an asshole is not a crime. So, right. But his language wasn't that bad, but people were just jumping on like, oh no, he pulled her by her hair. And I'm like, have you ever been fighting a little skinny girl? Seems like them little women put up a hell of a lot more fight than guys do most of the time.
You control the head, you control the body.
Yeah.
There's an argument there. You don't want to be tearing out tufts of hair, but if you can control the person's head, they're going to come wherever you take them.
Yeah. And I'm pro law enforcement, but those poor Sullivan guys that are telling her on the body cam, hey, they basically own you. You miss court, and she's saying, I was told there wasn't a warrant. And they're like, this is their job. So I was like, well, those guys facilitated that kidnapping too. Then if Wayne actually did commit a kidnapping, how come we haven't indicted those 2 law enforcement officers? Yeah. And, and I'm pro cop, but if it was illegal, why didn't they stop it? So
it just seems it really seems a technical issue. That was not really the intent. I mean, I've read the PBUS, was an amicus curiae on that, and that was a really good brief. I mean, you mentioned that you read it, and they pointed out a lot of things. I mean, that was never the intent of a kidnapping charge. I mean, it was, in response to ransoms and kidnappings. I mean, we see those all over the world right now. Not so much here because of that issue, but to sit there and try and go, well, because you've had some technical violation, and let's make no mistake, we're not saying that it's okay to have the technical violations. We're just saying, do those technical violations give rise to, this sort of federal charge? Because that was, where's your intent? Where's your, malice, whatever it is. I don't know enough Latin to give my legal terms. Because I mean, my first inclination at this was, well, he screwed up. He didn't notify him, and he should have gotten himself licensed, or gotten somebody that was and figured it out that way.
Yeah, like you said, it's too easy to do it now that we know what that expectation is.
But should that violation then give rise to life in prison or 10 years or whatever his potential sentence is? Now again, if oral arguments are worth anything, it's to try and get a feel for what the court's thinking on that. And I really did get the feeling, now I don't want to jinx this by saying this, but I did get the feeling that they were more on his side on that they didn't feel that this type of situation, trying to bootstrap this state charge and turn that into a federal kidnapping charge was justified. Whether or not they come down with that, I mean, if they go back to technical arguments over jury instructions, who's to say how it'll shake out? But
now you look, those lawyers did a great job with this brief because, on the appeal, your argument is what happened at the trial. Well, there was never bail case law brought up at the trial. So getting that brief, I think hopefully that'll be life-saving. And I think that's the issue. People want bail reform and they say the bail system's broke. It's only poor minorities in jail, but you look at the court system. So Wayne's been 4 years in jail, and I don't know, it took him after his pre-trial release was violated. He was in jail a couple of years. His partner pled guilty. Right. So that, I think, is the issue with our system. You get somebody in there that really truly believes that they didn't do anything wrong, but you sit for 2 or 3 years, you lose your job, you lose your house, you lose virtually everything. And then they're offering you this deal. Hey, just plead, we'll give you probation. Well, it gets them a conviction. You get out of jail. But that's what I told Wayne. I said, Wayne, if you plead to this, because at one point he was wanting to take the deal. I said, you're still going to have to do 85% of the time what you get. I said, it's easy for me to say. I'm not sitting in jail. You got to make your own decision. But man, I wish you'd fight this thing. And because if not, my fear was it's going to start happening everywhere. It's got a lot of my people right now about half-ass afraid to go anywhere. And I'm like, just make sure we're lawful. We follow the law.
Right.
And I've always been an advocate. When the law enforcement shows up and they're like, what happened? I tell them. Now I'm to the point, I will gladly give you a statement, but I need an attorney present.
Well, let's move on from Wayne just a little bit and see. You had referenced in one of your TikTok videos, and I think your TikTok is what, at Burton Bail Bonds. So if anybody wants to go look at that, there's lots of talk and stuff there that's interesting to listen to. But you mentioned a David Williams case out of Boone County, and I looked that up in CaseNet and saw that he'd end up convicted of something, but it looks like it's on an appeal. Tell us about that case a little bit.
So the interesting thing about his case, so when getting all this research and all these things from Wayne and Wayne's fiance, she sends me a Facebook quote where David's son, which I didn't know at the time, he posted this thing about they got arrested in Boone County. And it was a couple years ago. So I try to find this guy. I can't find him for nothing. Well, about 2 weeks before the dad's trial, the dad reaches out to me. And I'm like, holy shit, dude. So I was like, was this on Facebook before? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, I couldn't find you guys. I was wondering, well, somebody finally told him to get a hold of me. Well, he's lost, another guy, lost everything. He had a public defender, sweet lady. So I give her this amicus brief. I said, I'm going to make you the smartest bail lawyer Central Missouri. Well, then she subpoenaed myself to testify since we do the training, and Tim Brenner, he's a guy out of Southwest Missouri. Tim puts on some awesome training too. He trained my wife before we had our school. So he was going to also testify as an expert because he had trained the guy that trained David Williams, who has since passed away. So that's how they were getting him in there. Right off the bat, the judge says, no, we can't testify. Well, they have him charged with first-degree burglary in Missouri. It's the bad one. Unlawful use of a weapon and state kidnapping. So those 3 charges, he's facing, I think, 15 years if he's convicted of those, not counting probably the burglary one. So during the trial, they don't let Tim in there, but the judge right off the bat says, nope, Jeff's not testifying. So I get to sit in there and listen to it. You know, the law enforcement guy, the local PD guy, he'd only been on the street 4 months when he got the call that, you know, this happened. It was a third-party residence, but they confirmed she was in there. David gets in a little struggle with the renter. Partner, son comes from out back, goes in. I said, you got your body cam video? Because the guy's saying David put a gun to his head. David saying he had the load ready. He said, my body cam broke or he lost it the week before. And I was like, oh, yeah. So, but it was that the renter testified, you know, he's still having bad dreams. This had been a couple years earlier. Long story short, fugitive's in there, locked in the bathroom. His partner was his son, kicks the bathroom door. They take her into custody. They leave. They hear sirens going. They call PD, say, hey, we got her. We're headed to somewhere to drop her off to another bond company. So the prosecutor was like, well, you heard sirens coming. Why didn't you wait? Well, they made him look really bad on that. So ends up a lot of the things would not let any bail bond statute or case law be talked about. So the jury finds him guilty of unlawful use of a weapon, kidnapping, not guilty on first-degree burglary. The son prior had pled to the property damage for kicking the door, you know, no big deal. So they make a big deal out of it being a third-party residence. Well, I give the definition. They finally let me and Tim testify at the sentencing. So the judge wants to get it all done in this night. He doesn't want to make the jury come back. So it's late in the night. We finally get to testify. And when I start talking about every time Tim, and they let me listen to his testimony too, every time Tim would talk about statute, they would shut him down. So when I testified, I was like, we follow Missouri statute that is approved by the state of Missouri Department of Insurance for us to train these people. So then the prosecutor was objecting, Mr. Barton, are you an attorney? He's like, no, ma'am. Are you with the legislature? I was like, no, ma'am. And then she would be like, Your Honor, he can't testify about statute. So afterwards, I told the public defender, I wish I would have had you subpoena somebody, the investigator from the Department of Insurance too, because then he could have talked about, right? Because they interpret the statute.
You're expert.
Yeah. So then we got a long testimony with it. So when I gave her the definition of a residence by Missouri statute, I didn't do my homework. So she said, you've read every chapter of the revised statutes of Missouri? And I was like, no, man. And she was like, so you think that's the only definition of residence? And I said, well, that is a definition of residence because it says as an invited guest temporarily or yada, yada, you know. So she made me look bad on that. Well, after the trial, I went back and researched it. It is the only place in the statutes that talks about it. So next time I'll be ready for him. But had the jury laughing, and the jury came back and recommended no jail time. He got a fine. He still got a felony. They're obviously going to retry it, hopefully, to get some bond statute. The funny thing is, when the judge sent the jury back to deliberate on the sentence, He got right off the bench and he walks towards me, and I was livid. I said, I should effing retire, Your Honor. I was like, you can deal with these people. We bring them back in for you. That's what we're doing. And he said, your organizations need to get some clear statute. Well, I threw out some statute, and he said, is your statute older than the statute the prosecutor used? I said, it is, but it's still case law, or
Right.
case law, not statute. She was citing that State v. Wood, where before licensing, those guys came into Kansas City, went into the wrong house, shot somebody. I was like, they were self-proclaimed bounty hunters. Now we have licensing, and you're comparing apples to oranges here. But, and that's right there. There is a lot of bondsmen in Boone County, Missouri, 2 pages. And I called a lot of those companies. Nobody showed up for support. I was like, what is going on? And they were afraid that the courts would hold them if they came there in support, that they wouldn't get, beneficial treatment from the
Yeah, I mean, probably the DA's office more than the courts, but, same. So what's going on in Missouri? I know that Missouri Supreme Court rules have kind of screwed over a lot of the bondsmen there, and I think screwed over the state, letting a lot of people go. We've had a lot of bleed over here in the Kansas City area from Jackson County, people coming over, that people that were on signature bonds or low 10% bonds, there, and that are coming over in our area. What's the state of bail in Missouri? I mean, is there legislation you guys can look at? Are there bail bond associations that you're working on? What can we do to save it?
Yeah. So now, since the Lozier case, I had a bad taste in my mouth with organizations, but Peebus and Larry Newman out of Missouri, Missouri's got 2 organizations. It seems like they butt heads. We can't all come together for some reason, but I've been working really close, got to know Larry really well from Peebus. And now I tell people, that this organization was good. I had some other organizations told me flat out, Wayne was in the wrong. We're not helping him. And I'm like, really? You just want our dues money, and stand behind these guys, especially if we keep letting these just roll over and let these convictions mount up pretty soon. It's going to be hard.
Well, I mean, whatever your facts are on the ground, I mean, it's the old, bad facts make bad law, and so, and sometimes, I mean, if the court comes back on Lozier and says, nope, you can't do this, well, even though there were terrible facts, the court's made a good decision, but the court doesn't always come to that same conclusion that we think it should come to.
Right. Yep. So, I mean, it's like I tell people now, you got to comply with, do I think that his should be overturned? I would hope yes. But until that point, with that more clear statute, you've got to go by the interpretation that the state has, that you have to have a Missouri license if you're going to hunt in Missouri. And I tell everybody, if you're licensed in the state of Missouri and you're going to go somewhere else, they're always like, well, I call the local police. I'm like, don't rely on that. I was a cop. I didn't know. Hell, we used to have a bondsman that would tell us, I want to revoke this guy's bond. We would go out as cops, no warrant, pick him up. When I become a bondsman, I told the chief of police, he was my training officer, I said, you guys can't be doing that. You only make an arrest if there's probable cause of believe a crime's committed or there's a warrant. You're doing his job. So, there was a lot of, and I got my training post-certified, and I tell law enforcement, I used to go to this narcotics seminar at Lake of the Ozarks every year for my CEUs. And I'm like, tell those guys, let me come down there and do an 8-hour block, how you can work with your local bondsmen. You guys can help each other, especially you narcotics guys, you have a good relationship. And I got it post-certified so that they could come and they could get some benefit out of it. But, and I tell them, I'll teach you how to vet these bondsmen, how to, that you know what you're doing, instead of somebody just tell you, oh, I'm a bounty hunter, and they got a badge, and you're like, oh, okay.
And I got more power than the cops, and so you have to do what I tell you to do. And it's like, that's not going to work out in the long run. Now you provide that training, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so if somebody, I mean, are you all over Missouri, or, I mean, obviously.
I used to do my classes in Columbia because it was centrally located there. We have a house there too, but now I do it at one of our properties in Hannibal. So I'm in Northeast Missouri, so it's not handy for people coming out of Southwest Missouri, but I do get a lot of people now. It's harder and harder to keep your certifications on these things. It's like a convoluted mess, but we offer usually 2 12-hour days a month that we try to do. if we don't get at least 5, we typically don't hold the class now because it got to the point where I might have one person there that I'm training. So, you know.
Well, I mean, like the point that you made. I mean, Wayne made $500, and now he spent 4 years in jail, and who knows how many tens of thousands of dollars of his own money trying to defend this, and then what everybody else has done on this. If they can come take the class and at least have those ducks in a row to where the feds can't go, well, you're not licensed, so if you pick this person up. I mean, if you're in an area like we are, I mean, we're right across the state line. We have to go into Missouri all the time. So, I mean, my people are like, you need to make sure you've got all this. I don't want you going over there and getting arrested. I don't want it to cost me money. I mean, there's the whole potential civil liability as well. So, I mean, it's far simpler to have your ducks in a row before you do this than to pay the consequences and try and find some way why you didn't have to have your ducks in a row.
Yeah. That's why I recommend to people, I always call a local bondsman and ask them whatever. But now I call the licensing authority of that state. I want to know, what is your interpretation of it? What can I do? Can I come there? Can I have somebody come there? I want to know exactly, because every state now is different.
Well, the thing is, they don't always know.
Right.
We had a guy that our statute on licensing is if for bail enforcement agent licensing for Kansas, if you're a bondsman, if you're authorized by any court as a bondsman, you don't have to have that. You can go pick people up, and you can go pick people up for someone else too. Not even just show, and that's clearly laid out. And the Attorney General's office does the licensing, and it says in there, as an example, if you're a bondsman and you go out with another bondsman and pick somebody up, you're perfect client fine. Or you're picking up someone for another bondsman, you're fine, you have to be licensed. If you're not a bondsman, you have to have the license. There was a news story that made it here, and the news called the Attorney General's office, and they go, well, he doesn't have a license. It means he can't go pick people up. It's like, read your own questionnaire, your frequently asked questions on that. They didn't know.
Yeah. So. That's the scary thing. I wish there was, a unilateral, let's take the good from a lot of these states. And man, if they could put something out, all right, this is the way it is. I like California's deal on a misdemeanor skip. I can't remember what they call it. That's how I met Topo. He needed something done from somewhere in Missouri. And I was like, yeah, we'll help you out with it. But
then you have the Californias and the Texases where you can't go remove misdemeanors.
Yeah.
And, and if they won't extradite, you're just out.
Yeah. I had to tell one of my agents here this past year, I was like, is it a felony? Yep. I was like, are the warrants an NCIC? And they're like, well, I don't know. I was like, talk to the court and the sheriff, because in Texas, they can grab them in that county, but they can't even take it to the next county. It's not like they're bringing them out of there. So it's got to be extraditable. And tell the courts, if they got a problem with that, we'll pay for the extradition, but that's the only way we're going to get them back. So BartonBailBonds.com is where people can go if they want to look at the training on that. I mean, it sounds like we could probably talk for several more hours on lots of these different topics, but we'll kind of wrap it up here. So you do offer the training. It sounds like it's available once or twice a month, which is pretty good, because a lot of times it's available, every 6 months or something like that. So, I mean, if you want to get authorized for that, it would be a good thing to do, even if it's a trip to Hannibal. Go visit Mark Twain's that's right.
town.
We got plenty of hotels.
Well, Jeff, thank you for taking the time. I'll let you get back to your vacation and finish working on your tan down there. It looks like you're having a good time. Can avoid the cold here. It's supposed to be warmer next week, so hopefully you'll be there until it warms up here.
I will. Well, then I'm headed to Tampa. I got to watch another football game this coming weekend.
Oh, well,
Dang it. I appreciate it, man. It was my pleasure.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on with us today.
You need anything in Missouri, holler.
Oh, I'm sure I will.
All right.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Sure. We would like to thank our guest, Jeff Barton, for taking the time to speak with us today. You can find him at BartonBailBonds.com, where he offers regular training, or on TikTok at the @ Barton Bail Bonds, where he posts regularly lots of interesting topics. Bounty hunting is the exciting part of the bail bond business, but it can also draw the ire of local officials. It's important that you know the rules where you're intending to pick people up so you don't end up in the cell next to your fugitive. And if you can avoid that jail cell, we hope you'll join us on the next episode of the Bail in the Midwest podcast, where we'll continue to bring you critical information and conversations with people involved in the criminal justice system.
Join us again next time for the Bail in the Midwest podcast, hosted by Shane Rolf and executive produced by David Stuckman.